Hello everyone, welcome back to MMBS111 Introductory Microbiology. This mini lecture is going to cover section 22.1 and 22.2, and that's all we're really going to focus on in chapter 22 since we're near the end of the course and we don't really have a whole lot of time to dig into the rest of it. So we're going to focus on how the environment and humans and the other organisms that live here on Earth impact our total health, and then we'll also discuss animals and infectious disease and some examples of zoonoses. There are 4 learning outcomes for these 2 sections. First, be able to identify at least 2 examples of a zoonotic infection. Describe the characteristics of the rabies virus that make it a typical zoonosis. Discuss the effects of deforestation and reforestation on the emergence of Lyme disease, and explain how HIV transferred from animals to humans. So this image comes from the text, and it illustrates how human, animal, and environmental health are connected to one another. Especially now that we are able to travel globally, we're not restricted to one continent or one location. The economy is also global, so we trade food items and other products with different parts of the world, and that also means that livestock and organisms travel around the world as well. Disruption of the environment can also lead to transmission of pathogens to animals and to humans. We know, as we've studied in this course, that microorganisms are very adaptable. They evolve fairly rapidly relative to other organisms on Earth, and they can respond fairly quickly to changes that occur in the environment. Reservoirs of pathogens and virulence traits will also persist in the environment. So any change in these overlapping spheres of humans, animals, and the environment will have an impact on others. And some examples of those include the mixing of microbes in animal hosts. This can foster the evolution of new and deadly pathogens, which we have seen. Human activities promote the emergence of infectious diseases through ecological disturbances of animals. So as we change the ecosystem, those changes can promote the emergence of other diseases that we have not previously seen. Evolution of the influenza virus occurs through the mixing of different strains in different organisms like birds, swine, and humans. So we have seen some pandemics that have arisen as this particular virus has altered and evolved in other organisms and become more virulent. Newly emergent infectious diseases reflect the demographic environmental changes. As we change the surface of the Earth, we also see more infectious diseases emerge, such as West Nile and Zika. We also have multi-purpose use of resources, especially in less developed countries. So the same water is used for waste disposal, irrigation, and human consumption, and this helps to spread different pathogens. The rate of infectious disease emergence has increased in both humans and animals in the past 4 decades as population has increased, as humans have moved into closer proximity to previously uninhabited territories, and new infectious diseases will likely emerge and continue to do so, and may eventually become the plagues of modern times. So zoonosis is the transfer of disease-causing microorganisms from vertebrate animals to humans. It causes millions of cases of illness every year and about 1 million deaths each year. And microbes do have the capability to transfer back and forth between animals and humans. And this also leads to some adaptation and evolution of those organisms in each host. Another type of zoonosis is an infectious agent that is transferred from animal to human that eventually becomes adapted to the human host. So the original host was animal, and then over time, this infectious agent has adapted the ability to infect a human host, and then the human becomes the natural host of that organism. HIV is a perfect example. It originated in simians, and then over time evolved and adapted the ability to infect humans, and is now a different virus altogether. And HIV is a human infection. Approximately 75% of newly emerging human diseases have been zoonotic in the past 3 decades. And there is incredible potential for future zoonotic diseases, especially with population increase, as we change the ecology of the earth and remove more forest land, and move into closer proximity to wild animals. Once introduced into human populations, zoonotic diseases can spread from human to human, and sometimes this can result in pandemics. HIV and AIDS is considered an epidemic. There are so many cases of HIV and AIDS that it is an epidemic. The 2015 influenza virus infection is considered a pandemic. The virus initially evolved and resulted in bird flu, and that virus then developed the ability to infect humans through bird-to-human transmission, and it could set the stage for a pandemic similar to the 1917-1918 influenza pandemic. So the influenza virus has a tremendous potential to cause future pandemics. Rabies is a classic zoonotic disease. It is transmitted through exposure to the virus in saliva of an infected animal. It is almost 100% fatal in humans. But there is very little opportunity for human-to-human transmission. So it is a classic example because transmission is almost always animal to human. The number of rabies-related human deaths has declined, especially in countries where vaccination of dogs is regularly practiced. There are about 100 deaths every year at the turn of the century, and there are about 1 or 2 per year currently. These numbers are based on the U.S., not worldwide. And reduction in human cases is largely, as I said, the result of vaccinating dogs. Rabies, however, is a big problem in other countries, especially poor rural communities that don't regularly vaccinate dogs. There are about 1 death every 15 minutes worldwide. 40% of the victims are children younger than 15. The map there in the image shows the risk to humans of contracting rabies. So that dark red region is a high risk for contracting rabies, and these are typically poorer areas. They are more rural, and vaccination is not a regular practice of dogs that are pets. Lyme disease is another zoonotic disease, and it's really related to changes in the environment. As European colonists cleared the woods in New England for farming, a lot of the deer were hunted nearly to extinction, and the natural host for ticks are deer. In the 20th century, people started abandoning farming, migration to cities increased, so farmland was converted back to woodlands. The deer population increased. They are the natural tick reservoir. White-footed mice is the host for the larval stage of the tick life cycle, and these began to increase in forests. And so as these host organisms increased in population, the microbial organism also thrived, Borrelia burgdorferi. And you can see here on the map how the number of cases of Lyme disease has increased and how it has spread across the country. So the yellow there are from 2001, and the dark sort of red-brown is 2015. In 1976, children in Lyme, Connecticut began developing arthritis-like symptoms, and this is where the term Lyme disease comes from. It's actually named from the town where the symptoms were first recognized and diagnosed. So Lyme disease is caused by Borrelia burgdorferi, which is a spirochete. If you remember back to chapter 3, what a spirochete would look like, think about the morphology of that organism. The emergence of Lyme disease really reflects the changing demographics of the land, as well as changes in human behavior. We have more and more housing developments that are backed up to woodland areas, and this increases exposure to Borrelia burgdorferi infected ticks. Climate change has also had an influence on the epidemiology of Lyme disease. The tick population has increased as global temperatures have warmed, and those organisms, because of warming and movement of humans across the country, has spread to other populations where it wasn't normally found early in the 18 and 1900s. So global climate change really has a significant impact on biology and on disease. And it may increase the global burden of disease. Drought and lack of water are likely to get worse. Increased rainfall may lead to increases of some pathogens and vectors of those pathogens in other areas. Mosquito populations will likely also increase and increase the global incidence of the diseases that they transmit, like yellow fever, malaria, and other diseases. You can see in the map there, this is scientific estimates about climate change and malaria, and how malaria may spread as a result of warming temperatures. So you can see in the yellow, this is the current distribution of malaria. The red areas are possible locations where malaria may be extended because of warmer temperatures by about 2050. And it's believed that a 2 to 3 degree increase in temperature will increase the number of people affected by malaria by several hundred million. So that's a big deal. Hantavirus is another concern, especially in the U.S. There was an outbreak in '93 in the Four Corners area of the United States. So southern Utah, southern Colorado, northern Arizona, northern New Mexico. Healthy young adults were suddenly dying, and the culprit was change in climate. That year happened to be a very strong El Nino year, which caused wetter conditions in the Southwest than normal. Pine nut populations increased in those areas, which, because of a ready food source, the deer mouse population also increased, and people who were infected had exposure to deer mouse feces and urine. So as climate and weather patterns change, then we also see a change in food for other organisms, and then the populations of those organisms also change, and that directly impacts our health. So HIV and AIDS is also considered a zoonotic disease. Almost 70 million people have been infected with HIV, and 35 million people have died of AIDS since the beginning of the late 80s. 35 million people currently live with HIV. This pandemic began over a century ago in the 1800s, started in Central Africa, and it began with SIV. SIV is simian immunodeficiency virus. Scientists believed that SIV was most likely transferred into the blood of hunters who are harvesting bushmeat, and either cuts, bites from other animals, scratches from other animals, were likely the portal of entry into humans of this virus. And then over time, it has readily adapted to HIV and been able to infect humans. This map shows the sort of colonization and spread of the HIV virus. So the colonization of Africa likely contributed to the spread of HIV. Like I said, early 1800s is when scientists believe that SIV actually moved from simians and adapted the ability to infect humans and became HIV. And as Europeans colonized Africa and increased the population and moved native Africans out of Africa to other locations, this also contributed to the spread. Additionally, medical interventions that were carried out with unsterile tools, reused syringes, also increased the transfer of HIV from human to human. It's believed that infected individuals probably moved down from Central Africa and the Congo towards more southern Africa, spreading HIV along that way. And then once in southern Africa, it appears to have entered a more urban sexual network and now is primarily transmitted sexually. It's not exactly known how the virus was transferred to the U.S. In 1980, the detection of an abnormal cluster of Kaposi sarcoma among gay men triggered public health investigations, and this led to the identification of HIV and AIDS. So SIV, once a disease of chimpanzees, now has spilled over into humans and is now a human-to-human transmissible disease, and has evolved into a major human killer. And this is how zoonotic diseases can eventually evolve into diseases that are now adapted to human host only, and can become incredibly virulent and cause pandemic level infections and deaths in the human population. All right, so that's the end of our mini lecture. These are checking in questions. Make sure that you go through these and review the questions, provide some answers there. Go back to our learning outcomes, make sure that you understand those and that you can demonstrate mastery of those. Here's our critical thinking question. On the slide here is a model of the HIV virus. Using what you know about viruses and how they infect cells, think back to chapter 5. Explain what about SIV changed when it became HIV, and justify your answer. So this isn't just identifying a structure, but you need to explain your answer, why that structure. The answer is on the next slide, so go ahead and formulate a response to this question, and then you can check back in the next slide for my answer and compare yours to mine. And hopefully this video was helpful.